I thought I'd make a start. My name is James Clifford, and I'm the CEO of HGVC. And really, our bread and butter is training people to become truck drivers. And we do like a fully managed service, and that's what we've done, and we've done it for years. And really what I wanted to talk about, we were here last year at the conference, and really we've come across a kind of solution, and we've developed this with a few of our partners, as to how councils and organizations can actually think about their driver workforce, their refuse driver workforce, and really how to train the next generation, and potentially how to do it for free. And maybe not free, but certainly a hell of a lot cheaper than you might be getting from a commercial organization paying commercial rates. And so really, I'm going to explain all of this today. And the first thing is what it looks like to secure your next generation. And the second is really how you can do it for not much money at all. And so what you'll be hearing today is really me trying to tell you what are the problems. And of course, you probably know the problems better than I do. So if there's something I'm not saying, then please feel free to mention it, or I'll just carry on and you can mention it at the end, because I might not have thought of everything. The second is really probably what solutions you're using already for your driver workforce to ensure that you've got a secure driver workforce. The third point is really us talking about what a different kind of solution looks like. So not the solutions that you're using currently, but really if you had a kind of utopia of what training looks like and how it would work and what your workforce would look like, then really this is the kind of utopia. And I'm going to talk about what an ideal looks like, and of course you can pick and choose what would work for your organization. And then it's to talk about a scheme for everyone. Really, how do you do this? And how do you do this at low cost? And so I'll be talking about what that looks like and the schemes that are available to you. And then finally, I'll give you a couple of examples of people that we work with already and how they're utilizing the scheme and how it's working for them. I'll talk a little bit about what else you could be doing to really secure your driver workforce. And then finally, I'll be taking questions. So this is kind of how it looks. And to begin with, I'm going to look about what the problems are. The first problem is the person that built this PowerPoint. The pictures they used were so generic and terrible. And I just want to apologize for that before we even start. So please don't judge me by the pictures we're about to see, okay? But the first problem, which is a clear problem in the whole of the network, is an aging driver population. I don't know whether you know the statistic, but the average age of a driver is 53. And what it means is that you've got this built-up problem in almost every single fleet across the country, where they've got an older driving generation, and it's building up problems. Problems because they're more expensive, because potentially they're more erratic, and because they're going to retire at some point, and you're going to be left, who's going to be replacing them? The second is that there is a competition for drivers. We are in a chronic driver shortage, and there's lots of different reasons, which I'm not going to bore you with, but there's a struggle to get drivers. And although it has eased a little bit from where we were maybe 2 or 3 years ago, there is a problem with drivers. There's a problem with getting them, and there's a competition, especially around pay. You know, so drivers are pretty fickle. They're not that loyal to any particular company, and they will leave for not much more money. The third is something that maybe you haven't thought about, but government changed the rules around driver training, and now anybody can go direct from a car license right through to an articulated lorry. And most people really now just think, if I'm going to do all this training, I may as well go and do the large truck and not do a class 2 and then a class 1. Well, okay, that means lots of people are being qualified for both, but they want to drive the large truck straight away. And what does that mean for your sector, for refuse collection? Well, they're all class 2, and it's actually not that interesting for newly qualified drivers that want to just be driving the big boys, right? It is an issue, a total unintended consequence of a government maneuver, but actually It's 3-1 now. 75% of new licenses are Class 1. Driving is more frustrating in cities. And you will know when you're doing refuse collection, certainly in urban areas, that it's tricky. It's a difficult job. It requires a very high skill level of driving, and actually it's quite stressful. And drivers will try it, do it, and then potentially it's hard to keep those drivers because it's not an easy job at all. And then finally, look, we can talk about this in this room, right? But refuse driving is not that attractive. It is not a glamorous job like other jobs might be in driving when you're driving for John Lewis or something like that. And actually, it's hard to attract drivers and keep them when the job is to say work for a council and to pick up rubbish. Doesn't sound like a great job, and actually when it's a highly competitive market, it's not easy. So we understand the problems here, and really what I've said here is old school solutions, and the picture here is dark and gloomy because it's anyway, the first old school solution is that actually almost all organizations are stretching what they have. And that means that they're stretching the budgets they have, and they're stretching the people that they have to the limits. And that means overtime, rest day pay, really overworking the people that you've got to try and ensure that you can manage and do the services that you've promised to do. Another solution which all organizations really dislike using is using agency workers. Agency workers are expensive. You have to continually negotiate with the agency. And quite frankly, it's incredibly competitive at pay, especially during peak periods, of which we're just coming into the next peak period, where you've really got to compete with price. And you're just thinking, but I'm doing an all year round service here. Nobody likes using agency staff, but you don't have a choice. So what does this mean? It means that you have to pay more to retain staff. This can be expensive, and I'm sure that all of you have had to put up your salaries quite significantly in order to keep your staff as it stands. It's expensive, but really, if you have a problem like not enough drivers to secure your delivery, your collections, you need to pay them more. And then finally, what is a solution? And this is not a bad solution. There shouldn't be storm clouds here, but you've been upskilling your existing staff. And that is great. And that is something I want to focus on. But really, what we're going to be talking about today is how you can do that better and actually more affordably as well. So this is the kind of old school solutions that you've been sort of employing for the problems that I outlined before. And really what I want to talk about now is what utopia looks like. And utopia looks like the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset. But imagine this is really what it's titled. And really, this first point is imagine if you could upskill the majority of your staff to drive Cat C. Not just you had a designated driver who would always do the driving, but that everybody who was doing collections could drive. And you know, part of this is borne out. You know, I'm one of the people that when I put my rubbish out, it's always 2 minutes before the truck comes, or as the truck comes, I go down in my dressing gown, I put the bins there, and I've spoken to them, and I said, listen, can you drive the truck? And you go, no. I said, would you want to? He goes, yeah, but obviously we can't. There's no funding for it. And I'm just thinking, well, why is that the case? Why isn't it that you don't have a multi-skilled workforce where everybody can do that job? And by doing that, you're really upskilling your own staff, and you're also making sure that everybody is skilled within the department or within that particular sector. Imagine that you didn't have to rely on agency staff, because if you had so many different drivers, what it would mean is you would have less reliance on agency staff. This would reduce your costs and increase your security instead of manically phoning up an agency on the day or the night before saying, I need a driver and I need them now. Imagine getting new young blood into the team. There's an average age of drivers of 53. What about if you could actually attract younger staff, get them into the sector and get them into the roles that you're looking for? This is so important. It's important because it looks like you have a generational solution to your sector, and also because it invigorates the sector as well, and it will invigorate your department. And imagine if you could improve staff retention and development. If people can see that they're being developed and can see that there is a pathway to being upskilled, they will become more loyal if they see that they are being developed with additional skills. And imagine, and this is the real key point that I want to talk about, imagine that there's between a 70 to 100% subsidy on the training that would be to deliver to upskill the majority of your team. So instead of spending 100% of the full amount on one person getting trained, if you only had to spend 10% of that, you could train a lot more people and ensure that you had more people who had the skills to be able to drive Class 2 and ultimately do the role. This is an enormous cost savings for any organization. And imagining reducing your stress, your own personal stress, if you are organizing this and you have a secure workforce, a younger workforce, that you didn't necessarily have to think so much about professional development because it was being taken care of, then it reduces your stress as well, managing the department. This is all possible. And really, we've been doing this now for a couple of years, and I wanted to explain to you what this was, because honestly, not many people know about it. And so what I want to do is to introduce the HGV Skills Bootcamp. So this came about, if you remember, in sort of the autumn of 2021, there was no food on the shelves, there was no petrol in the forecourts. The UK was in a crisis point because there were not enough HGV drivers to be able to do deliveries. And the government said, well, hang on a minute, we offer apprenticeships, and apprenticeship schemes is our way of doing funding. But if you've ever used apprenticeships, you will know that they are cumbersome, it's very difficult to access the money, and it takes 11 months to do the apprenticeship scheme. They are a pain. And so the government looked for a better solution to get people into trucks and get them trained quicker. And it went to the Department of Education and said, can we use one of your schemes in order to train these people up and train them quickly? And the answer was the Department for Education were already delivering things called skills bootcamps. And in very, very quick time, the government constructed what was an HGV Skills Bootcamp. And to explain what this bootcamp is, the bootcamps have been around for a number of years, and really they've been totally overshadowed by apprenticeships. But bootcamps are 16-week courses designed to upskill somebody and put them into a new role using that skill. It is not like an apprenticeship where you have to spend a year or 18 months before they can do that new role. This is short, sharp shock to upskill somebody and put them into a role. And before the autumn or the Christmas of 2021, HGVs were never part of this. But to solve a chronic shortage of drivers, the government introduced this scheme. And we got involved pretty quickly and started to understand what the scheme meant and how to deliver it. And this is really a 16-week course that we've developed to be able to upskill and put people into roles. And just to explain quickly, this means that learners can go from a car license, or if you've got people collecting, refuse, they can go from a car license all the way to an HGV license in around 16 weeks. And it's not just the training that gets delivered, the HGV training, it's all of the other stuff. It's the theory test training, it's the CPC, the initial CPC. It is retests for everybody. The government wants to see successes, which means that retests are also funded as part of the scheme. It is everything to get somebody from a non-HGV driving role into a driving role. It is really what I would say an extraordinary scheme that the government has done. And what I didn't understand was why the government didn't talk more about this when they were doing it, because it's an extraordinary success. And so what happens? Well, it's available to every single employee that you have. Anybody who is employed by your organization can go onto an HGV Skills Bootcamp, providing you want to upskill them into a driving role and get them and put them into an HGV driving role. So anybody that you can think of who might be appropriate can use this scheme. But what we think is that anybody who is involved in waste collection could go onto this scheme, providing they were ultimately offered a role or part of the role as using that skill as part of their job. It means that you have the resources to be able to upskill everybody in waste collection who has a driving license and put them into this role. Makes an incredible difference to the security of your driver workforce. And it's not just available to your current employees. What happens if you don't have anybody to spare? If you're creaking with the number of employees that you have, and actually you can't think about placing somebody from your owner organization and putting them into the role. Well, it's okay. The Skills Bootcamp is also available to non-employees who you would identify as putting them into a driving role. So you could interview somebody and say, I want this person to become an HGV driver, and then they could go on to an HGV Skills Bootcamp. And I'm not joking when I say that there is a 70 to 100% discount on the subsidy that the government provides for the course. There is a 70% subsidy if your organization is 250 people or more. Then the government will pay for 70% of the cost of the course. If your company is less than 250 people, the government will pay for 90% of the training. It is an extraordinary scheme. 90% of the training would be paid by the government, and the SME would only have to pay for the final 10%. And if you're employing somebody from outside of your organization on the promise of an HGV job, there is a 100% subsidy. It is fully funded by the government to put them into a driving role. This is a completely remarkable scheme. And quite frankly, I cannot believe that every single organization hasn't used it. Question is what's the catch? Well, the first catch is that anybody that you put onto an HGV Skills Bootcamp must be offered a role that uses their new skill. So what you can't do is upskill your receptionist, give them an HGV driving role, and never put them into that role. If you upskill them, they must be offered a role which is an HGV role. Now, it could be a hybrid role. It could be HGV driver and reception work, for example, is absolutely fine. But what it can't be is that you're just upskilling people for the sake of it because it's so cheap, basically. So that's the first catch. So the government want to have more drivers on the road, and this is how they're doing it. In the back of their head, they are thinking, average age of a driver is 53. How do we secure this in the medium and long term? They have tackled the chronic shortage. Supermarket shelves and petrol forecourts are now stocked. But now they're thinking of a medium and long-term strategy. How do we make sure this never happens again? The next catch is that employers need to allow for this training to happen. You can't put somebody on this course and not give them the time to train. And there's really, for this scheme, there's a few different bits to it. First is that we offer that are delivered online courses that they have to sit webinars about day in the life of a driver, customer service, and also we do coaching for their theory tests. So those are webinars. The second is that anybody who wants to become an HGV driver needs to pass a theory test. This theory test is difficult. It is much more difficult than your car theory test. And they need time to be able to pass that test. And we would say that an individual needs to do about 40 hours work in order to pass the test. Now, obviously, we do not expect you to give them 40 hours off work, but you just need to be aware of that and understand if they're working in the evenings and so on and so forth, that this is what they are going to need to do in terms of passing it. The practical training is 5 straight days, and you have to give them 5 days off in order to do that. And if I was a nice employer, I wouldn't make them take their holiday for that. That actually you allow them to do that as part of their working role in order to get their license. And if they didn't pass, then you should give them the time off in order to retrain and retest too. But it's all subsidized. The retests are all part of the fee. But you have to be the employer that understands what this course involves. And finally, this is a Department for Education scheme. We have to go through enormous amount of compliance and metrics and KPIs and so on and so forth to make this scheme is correct. They will also come to employers to ask, how did you find the scheme? Did it work for you? And they might ask to use you for their promo and so on and so forth. So, there are catches to this, but these are not bad catches. We've done this with a couple of partners, and I just wanted to very quickly talk to you about who we've done it for in this particular sector. The first was Suez, and Suez bid for a contract, won it, and then asked themselves, well, okay, how do we deliver this? We have all done this, right? Bid for a contract, won it, and then thought, okay, now what do we do? They didn't have the number of drivers to service it. They wanted trusted people to deliver the contract, and they didn't necessarily want to get people from outside. This was a real blue ribbon contract for them. So they looked internally. They then came to us and asked us whether they could use the bootcamp scheme to upskill their employees and put them into these roles. They could, and to date, we've done 40 employees trained through this scheme in order to deliver this new contract. And I don't know if it's any more than 40 now, is it? Okay, so now it's closer to 50 drivers that they put through the scheme. Imagine the saving. This is 70% reduction on each and every course that they've used here. Each of these people has gone in to be a driving role, and currently it's probably been more than that now, but at the time when it was 40, they've saved £150,000 on training alone. If you thought about how much they would have to pay for recruitment fees, if they were to recruit those people from outside, it would be even more. And of course, they started the contract and the client was delighted. Secondly was Metro Rod. Metro Rod had a consistent shortage of HGV drivers, and really they wanted to solidify their workforce. Training was inconsistent. They had insourced it. They had done it to local partners who weren't particularly good, and they came to us to take over the contract and really to sort out their drivers and to give them a more stable, solid workforce that was better trained. We leveraged bootcamp to subsidize the training, and currently we've done 89 drivers, I'm sure it's more than that, that have trained with us, 19 through Skills Bootcamp. They have a blend of training, just to specify that bootcamp is only for Cat C and C plus C. For C1 drivers, you cannot get funding. And for Metro Rod, they have a number of C1 drivers that go through our contract. But currently they say £60,000 in counting. So these are people in the sector who are saving money. Finally, if you're going to do continual professional development and additional tools that you can use, please be aware of what you already have. You should think about CPD for employees. How are you training them? If you want to retain your staff, make sure you are continually training them. Don't just put them out every day to work. Really think about it. They will really appreciate being trained. And of course, if you're using bootcamp, then it's an enormous part of CPD to train them up to get this HGV license, because that is a skill for life. Secondly, customized CPC training. For your existing driver workforce, do you put them on generic CPC courses, or have you had CPC courses that are specifically designed for your organization? This is a missed opportunity if you're not designing your own courses to talk about your own nuances, to really make sure that the CPD that you have to deliver is delivered to your driver's best interest and to your own best interest. If you are doing refuse collection in urban areas, how do you do urban driving courses? In particular, for new employees, before they get behind a wheel, they really should have some practice of driving around urban areas. It is very, very difficult. I live in London, and I couldn't think of anything more difficult than driving around London streets, stopping and starting all the time, picking up and doing collections. Have you considered alternative fueled vehicles? More and more vehicles are going to be alternatively fueled, battery powered, and they will require different training. And actually, they are quite different beasts to petrol engines or diesel engines, and you should really consider doing that kind of training. And finally, health and safety training. I never think that this is done enough in a workforce, and my recommendation is that everybody should be doing health and safety training as part of their workforce. Because if you want that sort of utopia of workforce, you have to make sure that they are trained well, that they are continually trained well, that you have this full spectrum of employees who can all do that role, and that they are safe and healthy within your workplace. And that really does mean going on these courses and potentially reinforcing them every five years or so. So really, this is the kind of message that I wanted to talk about today. You know, I honestly am quite evangelical about the HGV Skills Bootcamp. I think it is an extraordinary scheme that the government is offering. It is one of the best things that the previous government has done in terms of skills and education. And if you are not using it, then really, I want you to think about how would you use the bootcamp? How would it benefit your organization? And if you have any questions, then this is the end of my talk. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions at all, then now is the time. But if you don't want to talk about it, if you don't want to ask now, then we have a stall just over there. I think it's 1190. And if you did want to go over there and talk to any of our staff, they'd be more than happy to explain things in depth. And if you say the code word Tony, you will get a particular treat as well. So thank you everyone for listening. And if there are any questions, then please feel free. Yes?
What's the sort of average retention rate after people do pass the course?
Okay, so the question was about retention rates and how long. Once people have been trained for a skill that they didn't expect to get, and in particular a life skill, which HGV driving is, really we've seen extraordinary loyalty from employees. They are so grateful of it, and there's no kind of golden handcuffs, but they see the employer in a different kind of light once they've put somebody through this course, they've given them the time in which to do it, and you really don't see many people leaving in the short. This has been running now since really the beginning of 2022. We haven't heard of people particularly leaving after this. Don't get me wrong, if somebody suddenly gets offered a 65 grand a year job with a petrochemical company, who would blame them for leaving? But really, if you are upskilling an individual and giving those skills and they have bettered their life, good for them, quite frankly. You know, I think it's all incumbent on employees to do the best for their employees as well. But it's very, very good. Employees are incredibly grateful with this course. Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you very much for listening.